Just yeshiva stuff? Always yeshiva stuff. It's the year course.
No, you cannot minimize. Fine. Okay, what I gave out to you before, and there generally are not handouts, but this is a copy from the Gemara, which discusses the Isser of Yichud. And what's important to get a general grasp on, and ultimately a specific grasp, is sometimes the Isser is a Torah Isser, and sometimes it's a rabbinic Isser. Normally, when we are, I would say, younger or less particular, we just say it's usser, so it's usser. So don't bother me with the details if it's Torah prohibition or rabbinic prohibition. But as we learned in Shabbos by Amir al-Akum, it makes a huge difference in many cases of leniency. If something is a Torah prohibition, it's going to be harder to get around. If something is a rabbinic prohibition, it's going to be easier to get around. So Yichud is the same way. There are tons of rules that will be more strict or will not, leniencies will not apply to a Yichud d'oraisa where they would apply to a Yichud d'Rabbanan. So in that sense, it's just nice to see it's because it's short. This is basically the piece of Gemara that lays out what is d'oraisa and what is d'Rabbanan. And it's also neat because it gives you a chronological time frame as how halacha developed, and if you are familiar with malachim, so it also will be a nice chazara for that, because one of the rules of yichud is a outgrowth of a story in malachim. All right, so the Gemara starts. This is a Gemara in Avodah Zarah. It's primarily discussing things the rabbis prohibited because of issues that would involve non-Jews. So Bali says, it's the name of a rabbi, Amar Avimi no Ta'ah, the name of another rabbi. The underlined words are just names. Mishmei de Rav. Okay, now is where the statement starts. Piton, the bread of, Shmeinan, the oil of, and Yeinan, the wine of. Okay, we'll stop right now for a moment because what we really care about is the bolded word. The bread, oil, and wine of a non-Jew are prohibited. So we are all familiar with the wine. That's wine touched by a non-Jew. That's not yayin nesech. Oil of a non-Jew is a takana that did not last. It was suggested to prohibit the oil purchase from a non-Jew. The Jews could not deal with that limitation, and the rabbis repealed the Gzeira, which is just interesting in its own right. And bread refers to the law of Pas Akum, which would be the bread baked by a non-Jew, which, without getting more than a minute in it, is going to be prohibited when it is a private baker, and is going to be permitted when it is like a commercial bakery. And then you have different times where people are machmir to only have the bread of a Jew, even though it's really, we hold that it's mutter to have commercial bread baked, but some are machmir on Shabbos, some are machmir, most are machmir during the Aseret Tshuva, and then some are just machmir in general. But okay, that's the three things of the four that we're going to mention. Those are not relevant at all to Yichud, but they just are in the same sentence, so why not? The fourth thing is binosehem, the daughters of. So just like the bread of a non-Jew is prohibited by the rabbis, the oil of a non-Jew is prohibited by rabbis, but subsequently repealed, and the wine of a non-Jew is prohibited by the rabbis, so too are the daughters prohibited by the rabbis. Now, why do I tell you that they're prohibited by the rabbis? Because the Gemara says, Kulon, all of these, meaning these four, Mishmona Eser Davar Hain, are amongst the 18 enactments that were made in the times of Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, early in the middle of the second Beis Hamikdash period. Okay, now the Gemara has a tremendous difficulty, not with the bread and not with the oil and not with the wine, but with the daughters. What does it mean the rabbis prohibited non-Jewish daughters. The simple understanding would be that that meant to prohibit a Jew to marry a non-Jewish daughter, to which the Gemara says, B'noseim maihi, what is included in the rabbinic prohibition of their daughters? Okay, dot, that I left out. But to summarize, the Gemara feels, does it really mean to marry a non-Jewish girl? The Gemara says, but that is a Torah prohibition, and then goes through a lengthy, not that lengthy, but more lengthy than I wanted to put on the sheet, discussion as to how we know it is Torah prohibition for a Jew to marry a non-Jew. Okay, once it's demonstrated that there's a Torah prohibition for a Jew to marry a non-Jew, we return to our original question: what does it mean that the rabbis prohibited non-Jewish women? So the Gemara answers, Asu inu gazer afilu yichud. That's the Gemara's answer. Yichud with a non-Jewish woman is an Isser D'Rabbanan. What would be an Isser D'Oraisa? We'll get there in a moment. But what the Gemara is saying is that to seclude oneself with this would be a Jewish man with a non-Jewish woman, and vice versa. A non-Jewish man with a Jewish woman would be an Isser D'Rabbanan. Okay, we'll finish the whole piece and then lay it out, but that's an important first step. But the Gemara feels that Yichud can't be what Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel prohibited, because Yichud, Nami Beis Dino Shel David Gazru, because from a chronological state, the rabbinic prohibition against seclusion was done by David HaMelech. Okay, now, the Amar of Yehuda, the Oso Shah, at that moment, Gazru ala Yichud. Okay, now the Gemara does not say what that moment is. You're supposed to know that. Rashi will tell you, but can anyone take a stab? What happened in David's life that would have, you have to know Malachim. If you don't know Malachim, it's not fair. Okay, what happened in David's life that would have inspired him to make a takana against Yichud? Drawing blanks here. No, it's not on him. Amnon and Tamar. Okay, David had fill in the story, David had a daughter and a son, but there was, it's complicated. They were really converts in the sense that they were the products of women who were captured in war. Amnon and Tamar essentially were biological brother, the half brother and half sisters, but halachically they were not related. And Tamar was feeling ill one day. Amnon came to take care of her, and Amnon ended up forcing himself upon Tamar. So if that story doesn't ring a bell, it probably you didn't learn it, because you usually don't forget things like that. But in any case, so David HaMelech, after seeing such a thing could happen, said men and women cannot have seclusion, because my son Amnon forced himself upon his biological sister Tamar, and therefore there can't be seclusion. Okay, so now we have a problem, which is David comes much before Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So did David make the decree against seclusion, or did Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel make the decree against seclusion? So the Gemara gives the simple answer, which is Yichud de Bas Yisrael. Amnon and Tamar were Jews. Now, they may have been born from converts, and that affects their halachic relationship with each other and everything, depending when they were conceived, and without getting into all of that. But they were Jews. But Yichud with Avodas Kochavim, lo, there was never such a gezerah. The Asu Inuhu, so Beis Shammai Beis Hillel came and Gazru afilu Yichud Avodas Kochavim. Okay, so before we get to the next bold spot, so let's get where the Gemara is holding right now. We know there was some tikana, some enactment made regarding Gayish women, but the Gemara is unclear what it is. We posit it means to marry a Gayish woman, to which the Gemara says, no, marrying a Gayish woman is an Isser D'Oraisa. So we say it means being secluded with a Gayish woman. Okay, fine. But David made a enactment against seclusion many years prior to Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, David being prior to the first Beis Hamikdash, and Beis Shammai Beis Hillel being during the second Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara says that's not a problem. One was talking about Jews, and one was talking about Goyim. Okay, now from this I'm making up on my own, so feel free to disagree with it, but I think it makes sense. Why would there not have been a rabbinic enactment against Yichud with a non-Jew up until Beis Shammai Beis Hillel? So I would theorize that in a world where Jews really were not supposed to have any involvement with non-Jews, because from the time the Jews got into Eretz Yisrael, the Tkufas, the period of the Shoftim, the period of the first Beis Hamikdash, you really didn't have a large non-Jewish presence living hand in hand with Jews. So the rabbis didn't need to enact anything to safeguard between a seclusion of a non-Jew and a Jew, because there just weren't non-Jews around so much. The Torah law is the Torah law. That's just that's the absolute thing. But as far as any enactment, now the truth is that even amongst Jews, we didn't need an enactment until an event took place a couple hundred years after they got into Israel. But then David made the enactment within Jews. The Jews go into exile for 70 years. Theoretically, they were involved with non-Jews. And if you learn the book of Ezra, it seems to be that some actually failed and intermarried. But apparently it wasn't long enough of a period of time, or it wasn't the first thing on the rabbi's radar screen to make an enactment during that period. When the Jews came back to Eretz Yisrael, once again, we were primarily separate until the Greeks made problems, and the Romans came right after the Greeks, and by that time, Jew and non-Jew are living side by side in Eretz Yisrael. Right? From the time the Greeks made their presence, certainly in the Roman occupation prior to the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, Jews and Goyim lived side by side. There were Goyish cities in Eretz Yisrael. Once that happens, so then the rabbis had to sit down and say, we have to make all these decrees against relationship with non-Jews. Okay, that's my own theory. I don't know if it's right or not, but it does definitely make sense. But what we do know for sure is the rabbinic enactment, Jew to Jew, starts in the days of David, and Jew and non-Jew is in the days of the second Beis Hamikdash. Yeah.
But isn't the whole thing with Sota that she?
Okay, yeah, so we're getting there, although that itself is not a proof, although you happen to be right. That's going to be the Gemara's next point. A sota is a double whammy. There is a warning not to seclude. So I could argue, although you happen to be correct in reality, but without what the Gemara is about to say, I could argue with you and say it's only once you were warned plus violated the warning that you get yourself into that predicament. Whereas to be alone without a warning may not be prohibited. It's not true, but that's not the source. Although what you're saying is right in reality, but it wouldn't be the source. The source is the following, and it's an important source to know because it's going to help us remember the built-in leniency to seclusion. So then the Gemara says, and it's in bold, so just in case you haven't been listening until now, this is where you have to pick up. Yichud the Bas Yisrael d'Oraisahi. What are you talking about? David didn't make an enactment of Yichud, but he did, by the way. But the Gemara says, what do you mean? You can't seclude with a Jew and a non, a Jew and a Jew can't be in seclusion. That's a Torah law. Okay, it happens to be, you're right. And the Sota plays along with that law, although you couldn't derive it from Sota because Sota is slightly different because it comes with the man's warning, but it's true. Now, the source is the Amar of Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Yeshua ben Yehotzrak, again, names. Remez liyichud minat Torah minayin. The Gemara is bothered because it just made a pretty serious suggestion that seclusion is a Torah prohibition. But if you open the Torah and start with Bereishis bara and end with Le'nei Kol Yisrael, you will not see thou shalt not seclude yourself. Okay, it's not there. The best you'll get is sota. Okay, which incidentally, if you look through, it's very unclear what actually is going on there without the oral law. Anyways, but certainly there is no, you shall not seclude yourself. So the Gemara knows that. So the Gemara says a remez, a hint, an allusion to the Torah law. Okay, so there's a pasuk in Devarim, and this is actually talking about the prohibition of seducing another person to serve avodah zarah. Okay, it's called a mesis. If a person tries to convince people to serve avodah zarah, so that person is put to death simply for trying to get other people to serve avodah zarah. The Torah's description of the seducer is ki yasischa achecha achicha ben imecha. When your brother, son of your mother, comes to seduce you. Now, one could read the Torah simply as being an example. It's giving an example. Who would seduce you? Your brother, who happens to be your half brother on your mother's side, because that's normal, and that's the one coming to seduce you. So the Gemara doesn't buy that. V'chi ben ein mesis, ben av einu mesis. What does that mean? Seducers are only coming from half maternal brothers, right? Your half paternal brother would never seduce you. So the Gemara says the Torah is teaching a second law piggybacked on a first law. The prime law is seduction to avodah zarah, right? You want to come serve an idol with me? Right? That transgression. That's
Missionaries.
Missionaries, except these are Jewish missionaries. Okay, sometimes they're Jews also. Okay. In any case, the missionaries, essentially. Why does it have to be your maternal half brother? Because seduction is generally done privately, because in so much as it's punishable by death, usually people would be smart enough to do their seduction in secret or in seclusion. The Gemara deals with how are we going to convict this person if he does everything secretly? We need two witnesses. So the Gemara says we use entrapment. We get two witnesses to hide behind like a curtain, a wall or whatever, and you try to, once he seduces you once, you say, come back another time, and then essentially there's an element of entrapment. He does it again, and witnesses pop up from behind the curtain and say you're in trouble. Okay, but again, not really relevant to us here. What we care about is it generally happens in seclusion. So now the Gemara says, I'll tell you what the Torah is telling me. Ben misyached im imo, ve'ein acher misyached im kol arayos shebetorah. What the Torah is telling us is, by saying it's a maternal half-brother that is doing the seduction to avodah zarah and is being secluded with you, the Gemara is alluding to that maternal half-brother. So think of a mother and a child. Let's say they were in seclusion together. That would be okay. But that's the only forbidden relationship where seclusion is okay. That's the remez in the Torah. Yes, you need Torah Sheba'al Peh. You would never figure this out on your own, not in 100 million years. But that's what the oral tradition is telling us. The reason the Torah tells us that the seduction of avodah zarah is being done by a maternal half-brother is to allude to the fact that a son can be secluded with his mother, but no other forbidden relationship can be secluded. Okay? We'll get there, okay? Whatever you're worried about, it'll be taken care of. Okay, so now the Gemara says, that means Yichud is a Torah law. What did David HaMelech do? So the Gemara answers, Yichud d'oraisa is an Eishes Ish, a married woman, or any other forbidden relationship. David came along and made a gezerah on a penuya, an unmarried woman, and Talmidei Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, they made the gezerah even on a non-Jew. Okay, so now in conclusion, with the background. The Torah law given down orally with a allusion in the Torah by Moshe at Har Sinai was, no Jew is allowed to be secluded with another Jew he is forbidden to have a relationship with, other than a mother and a son. Okay? But any Jew can be secluded with a Jew who he is not forbidden to marry, and any Jew can be secluded with a non-Jew because it's not even on the radar screen. David HaMelech says, wait a second, a Jew and a Jew, even if they are permitted to marry, they also cannot be secluded, because look what happened with Amnon and Tamar. And Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel's students, when Goyim and Jews lived side by side, said, well, we can't let Jews be secluded with non-Jews because that's just going to lead to a whole bunch of problems. It never needed to be addressed because it just wasn't practical, but now we're going to make that prohibited also. Okay, now, just before there's any terrible confusion, mother-son is the same thing as father-daughter, although the Torah's allusion is a mother to a son, because it's a ben imo. It is self-evident that the relationship between a mother and a son is the same relationship as a father and a daughter. So that also has no yichud. And that is extended to a grandparent to a grandchild. So a grandmother and a grandson don't have a yichud prohibition. A grandfather and a granddaughter do not have a yichud prohibition. Sisters and brothers, we will discuss later. Okay. I'm trying to think who's it's more relevant to you because people are older. But sisters and brothers, we will discuss later on. Suffice it to say that although a sister cannot marry a brother, they are permitted to have seclusion, but there are limitations to that permission. And we'll have to explain it, because if you just look at the Gemara, they should be prohibited. And it's possible they were prohibited at some point in history, but things changed. And we'll explain how that could be later on. So what we have now is father, daughter, mother, son, or grandmother, grandson, grandson, granddaughter. That is permissible, period. There's no yichud, there's no seclusion, there's no law at all. They can't marry each other. They can't have a physical relationship with each other, but they can be secluded with each other. Any other forbidden relationship would be a Torah prohibition if both the man and the woman are Jews. Now, if a woman is married, that will automatically make a Torah prohibition with every single other person on planet Earth other than the husband, every Jew, right? If a woman is in the state of nida, she will also be prohibited to every other person on planet Earth other than her husband. And although she's prohibited to her husband at that moment, there is no law prohibiting seclusion. A husband and a wife never have seclusion once they've been physically together the first time. If anyone has had a situation where a chuppah took place while the woman was in nida, then there are issues that need to be dealt with because of the fact that there is no seclusion prohibition between a man and a woman who's married takes effect once they've lived together once. Okay, but once they've lived together once, then there is no yichud between husband and wife, even if the woman is a nida. Even though he's prohibited to be with her at that moment, there's still no seclusion prohibition. So it comes out like this. A married woman is going to have a yichud d'oraisa with every other person other than her father, being a daughter, her son, being a mother, grandfather, being a granddaughter, and grandson, being a grandmother. Okay, but every other man is going to be usher because she's married, so she's usher to everyone. A woman who is a nida and isn't married, okay, because she's married, she's already married, she's also usher to every single person, period. She's usher to every single person. There's no one permitted. Her yichud is usher Torah to everyone. So now this gets confusing because David made a gezerah against Amnon and Tamar, and one would say, wasn't Tamar not married and she was of age, so wasn't she a nida, and it should have been a Torah prohibition. So the facts are that before the destruction of the temple, the Beis Hamikdash, when we had to care about ritual Tuma and Tara, so women used the mikvah even when they were not married, because her being Tumeya as a nida would create all kinds of issues with Truma, Kodshim, or in general dealing with Tara. Even if you weren't a Kohen, even if you were a Yisrael, you had Yontif where you had Korbanos, all three Yontifs, there were Korbanos. In general, there may have been other Korbanos here and there, and you would have had to give Truma to Kohanim. It would have paid to be on top of being Tameh and Tara. Women were not, unmarried women used the mikvah. So therefore, there was a large number of, I don't know how large, a number of women who were nidos, but weren't married, but they would use the mikvah anyways, and therefore you would have a population of what we call a penuya tahora, a tahor unmarried woman. That's who David needed to make his takana, his gezerah. Nowadays, we really don't have a penuya tahora, because once a woman starts menstruating, she doesn't go to the mikveh until she gets married. So all your single women walking around all have a yichud prohibition from a Torah level with all other men, which is why when a woman is with, when we teach this in the, it's a little trickier with the 12th grade when we do this, because they have in mind dating in a year or two, and it's advised against, or it's not, it's difficult to discuss outright the idea of mikvah and the like, is not, so it becomes actually a tricky thing, because they have to know that their yichud laws while dating are all Torah prohibitions, yet we just got through saying that unmarried women, David made a gezerah against, it's derabanan. That's because the unmarried woman in David's time was tahora, or at least for a couple of weeks during the month. Nowadays, it's not like that. So David's gezerah really only applies to little girls, okay? Basically between the age of 3, which is when yichud starts for a girl, and the time they begin menstruating, which depending on the girl could, 9, 10 on the early stage, and then, somewhat later otherwise. So it comes out from a practical level when we put this all together. Anytime there is a Jew and a non-Jew, it's automatically derabanan, which is somewhat counterintuitive, because we would think with a non-Jew it's even worse, but it's actually not true. Yichud with a Jew is actually worse than yichud with a non-Jew, although we will explain later that that may not be true for a woman and a non-Jewish man versus a Jewish man and a non-Jewish woman. Just not to be more confusing, and we have to be at the beginning, within Jews, the level of Isser is higher, but the concern that another Jew will force himself upon a woman is not an assumption. It's ironic because David made his gezerah because of such a occurrence, but that's not the default assumption. Therefore, whenever you deal with a Jew and Jew yichud, the assumption is it's a higher level of Isser, but the assumption is that anything is going to be consensual, and the halacha deals with that accordingly. Within a Goyish man and a Jewish woman, not the other way around, because we don't assume the Jewish man will force himself on the Goyish woman, but when you deal with a Goyish man, so then although the Isser is less, because it's the Rabbanan, there is an additional concern that the Goyish man will force himself upon the woman, and that will change some of the ways we deal with the halacha. If this is unfair to Goyish men in the world, I apologize on behalf of the rabbis, but they felt that Goyish men were more likely to force themselves upon a woman than a Jewish man, and I hope they're right. Okay, I can tell you, but that's how. So it's a little tricky because the Jew-Goy Yichud is actually less strict in many ways, and specifically when you're dealing with a Jewish man and a Goyish woman, with a Goyish man and a Jewish woman. So the Yichud is actually halachically less strict as far as its severity, but the applications of what is lenient have to deal with the additional concern of the non-Jewish man forcing himself. We'll discuss that all later. All right, so again, you have Jew and non-Jew, it's D'Rabbanan. Jew and Jew is almost always going to be the Oraisa because of the fact that the woman is almost always going to be either married or Anita, one or the other. The only time a Jew and a Jew is going to be D'Rabbanan when it's one and one. Right now, everything is one man, one woman. We haven't talked about one man and multiple women, or multiple women and one man, or one woman and multiple men. That's later. Everything right now is one and one. That will only apply to a girl between the ages of 3 and becoming a Nida. That's the only time Jew and Jew will be D'Rabbanan one-on-one. Okay, just that's the way it plays out. It's almost always a D'Oraisa concern when there are Jews involved. Now, as far as the age for a girl, 3 years old is the cutoff age. A girl less than 3 years old is, for all intents and purposes, it's not possible to have what's called halakhically a physical relationship with her. It's just not called that in halacha, and therefore there is no yichud prohibition before age 3. Once the woman turns 3, then there is a yichud prohibition. Now, this also seems to confuse people, so let's not be confused. The girl at 4 is not chayiv because she's a ketana. But when I say there's a yichud prohibition, it means the adult man has a yichud prohibition with the little girl because she's old enough to halachically have what's called a physical relationship in halacha, and that was David's gezerah. So when we say that a girl between the ages of 3 and 10, 11, whatever it is rabbinically prohibited to be secluded, it really is the prohibitions on the man because the woman's a katana and she doesn't have any responsibilities of her own, right? I mean, she's not bas mitzvah, okay? But we talk in terms of it's prohibited because she's the second party in a prohibited arrangement. For a boy, it's age 9. Before the age of 9, halacha views that a boy is physically unable to consummate what would be considered halachically a physical relationship. If every doctor agrees with that or not, it's not relevant. That's what halacha gives as the age cutoff. Over 9, a boy is assumed to physically be able to consummate a physical relationship in a halachic sense, and therefore the rules of yichud apply. Now, that would mean that a 12-year-old girl and a 9-year-old boy would be a yichud d'oraisa, assuming she's Anita, but not on the boy's side. The boy's a katan, but on the girl's side, because that which the boy is a katan, that has to do with his obligation and responsibility as far as being punished. But he's old enough to do the act which is prohibited on the woman who is bas mitzvah. So in the same way that a 13-year-old boy would be rabbinically prohibited with a 5-year-old girl, even though the girl doesn't really have a prohibition, the 12-year-old girl would be Torah prohibited with the 9-year-old boy. although the boy, although it's a Torah prohibition, but he's a cotton, so he's just putter. A 9-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl would have theoretically a yichud d'Rabbanan arrangement, but they're ketanim, so there would be a chinuch issue, but it would still be to be avoided. Again, assuming that they are not siblings, where we have a leniency. Okay, so one more time for me and hopefully for you to get it. Now we have everything we need for the introduction. Jew and non-Jew is d'Rabbanan. It's usher to seclude with a Jew and a non-Jew, and again, it starts at age 3 and age 9. Boy, girl, and again, it would be the same way. The Jewish girl with a guy over 9, or a Jewish man with a guy over 3. Right? The girl's 3, the boy is 9. That's a physical thing, as interpreted by halacha. Guy, not Jew, is d'Rabbanan. If the girl is between 3 and menstruating age, then, meaning actually experiencing a nida, a flow, she is a d'Rabbanan prohibition with a man, regardless of the age of the man. I mean, the man could be bar mitzvah, it makes a difference. The whole relationship, the yichud is d'Rabbanan. Once the girl is a nida or married, then the boy's relationship with her will be always yichud d'oraisa, and the exceptions to the yichud d'oraisa will be the spouse, husband and wives, never have an isser to be secluded once they've had relations once, no matter what, even if the woman is a nida, and a father and daughter and a granddaughter, grandson, son, mother, they will never have a yichud issue. And again, obviously, it doesn't matter if the mother is a nida or not, because she's a mother, and a mother is usher anyways, but it's not. There's just no isser of seclusion between a parent and a child. Okay, one last thing, because it's a quirky thing that in this community, actually, it's actually easy to give examples. But you could have a woman, a child, between the ages of 3 and we'll call it 10, 11, who is a yichud d'oraisa. Now, how will that be? Because we said 3 and 11, no one's married yet, and they haven't begun to become a nida yet. So if your aunt is between the ages of 3 and 10, then she's prohibited to you as an aunt, which is a forbidden relationship. Now, how do you have an aunt that, remember, you have to be, to make a difference on you as a boy, you have to be 13 or higher. So how do you have an aunt who's less than 10 if you're 13? So it exists in this very community. We have such a situation. Baruch Hashem, if you can get a large family with a big gap between the oldest and the youngest, you can pull this off. I believe that Moshe Leib Bechafer had at some point had an aunt who, when he was over bar mitzvah, was between the ages of 3 and 10. I think that's what we figured out at some point. But the point is that situation becomes abnormal because you usually think of that girl as being, she's not married, she's not a nida, how can it be d'oraisa? But if she's an aunt, that's also a forbidden relationship. So that makes the yichud d'oraisa. So for that babysitting arrangement, it would be dealt with as a yichud d'oraisa as opposed to a yichud d'Rabbanan, which will make differences in some regards. That's either, depending how you look at things, either a quirky case or a fun case. But the bottom line is, generally speaking, unmarried little girls will never be a yichud d'oraisa, it'll only be yichud d'Rabbanan. Okay. And finally, this is all one-on-one. Once you get to 1 and 2 or 2 and 1, that's a different discussion. So this is the introduction. If we have this clear, then everything that goes beyond this will be easier, because there will be differences, like legitimate differences in how strict you need to be with, from a man's standpoint, with the maid who's not Jewish, as opposed to the married woman, or for the babysitting arrangement where you'd have a 13-year-old babysitting a 5-year-old girl or something like that, let's say a cousin, something that would make sense, socially and everything. But you still have a yichud, the rabbanan issue, that will be different than other situations. And then once you get out of 1 and 1, once you get to 2 and 1, it's all going to be the rabbanan, which we'll discuss later. So there's going to be a sizable number of yichud cases, especially for a married woman, that are going to be yichud d'oraisa. Yet there's going to be a sizable amount of cases that are a yichud. I just said Durban, I meant d'oraisa. There's going to be a large amount of cases that are going to be d'rabbanan, and we need to keep that separate because the halacha will be significantly more lenient for the yichud d'rabbanans and the yichud d'oraisas. Okay, so far so good. Yeah, okay, it's good. Fine. In Yirtzeh Hashem, next week we will continue.